Hello, folks. Just checking to make sure. Okay, great. So, hello, everyone. This is Alistair Post Quinn from double-knitting.com, Falling Blocks Designs. And I am going back to my roots a little bit and doing a little bit more of a off the cuff, less scripted, less high tech looking live stream here. And first thing I'm going to do is give you some updates. So I'm going to be talking a bit about two pattern double knitting and three color double knitting, and I hope you'll enjoy what I have to say. But I also wanted to talk about the future of this stream. So I started up this live stream thing a couple of weeks before, maybe a month before my house burnt down. It was sort of a test to find out whether people were interested in seeing me in this format, to see whether people interacted, and to sort of test the waters for a potential podcast down the line. I was building up my technology for this sort of thing, and deciding whether I wanted to spend the time producing a podcast on top of everything else I'm trying to do. And of course, it was COVID at that time, and so I was thinking, oh, I'll have a bunch of extra time. I'm not at work, etc., etc. And then my house burnt down, and I had to replace everything from scratch. And as I did that, I went back down to a significantly lower standard of technology that I was working with. And so I kept doing the live streams because it was what I was capable of doing. And now that we're a number of months out from that event, and I've had time and ability to rebuild my collection of technology, and my ability to maybe do a podcast is significantly higher now. I can start thinking about that again. Now, at the same time, I'm looking at dwindling numbers on the live stream. Right now, I've got 3 people. That's about what I had last time. Now, a bunch of other folks tune in afterwards, which is great, and I'm happy that people are doing that still, and are interested in what I have to say. But the whole essence of a live stream is interactivity, and while I can watch the chat and I can answer people's questions live here, to be perfectly honest, it's not really set up for that, and I'm not 100% sure how to set it up for that. And of course, I'm happy to see people commenting as I'm doing the live stream, but I've sort of been scripting this. I've been doing a script and reading from it, and that's maybe not really a great way to do a live stream per se. So I guess I want to know what your thoughts on it are, either now or before the end of the podcast, or see, I'm already slipping into it, before the end of the live stream, and or later, if you're viewing this later. So I've already had a few comments on this morning's post on my Falling Blocks Designs Facebook page, where people who were asked this exact same question seem to be in favor of the podcast format. And so this might be my last live. We'll see. We'll see what folks want me to do. If I do a podcast, there's probably going to be a bit of a break in my schedule, because I'm going to have to build up a library of clips and and decide decide what I really want the podcast to be like. I have a pretty good idea of what I want it to be, and it's going to be somewhat different from this format that I'm working in right now. So, um, so anyway, yeah, that's where that is right now. Let's see, other news in my world. The Wuxing pattern collection, the 5 elements hats. The second pattern, the honey locust pattern, is actually ready to go. I just need to decide how I want to release it. Originally, and honestly, this was something that was happening before or it was a conversation I was having before the fire, was that similar to the Agni Deus hat, the fire hat, I was going to release Honey Locust, the earth hat, with the yarn company that provided the yarn, in this case Stunning String Studio. The previous one was 100 Ravens. So actually it was released through Bead Biz, who provided the beads, and they were selling the kit. 100 Ravens, I believe, also did some, because they work together a lot of the times. Stunning String Studio provided the yarn for Honey Locust, and they were going to do a kit, and that was going to be the big announcement of that pattern's availability. But it's been months now, and delays and delays and delays due to everything going on in my life. Finally, I have had the time to put the pattern together, and it's looking good, and I think people are going to enjoy it. But I have to decide, with the help of Stunning String Studio, whether I'm going to wait and have them do the big announcement as a kit, which is probably going to be a couple of weeks of further delay, or if I just release it now and have them do a kit as an extra thing. So one way or the other, soon that pattern will be coming out and added to the Wuxing collection for those of you who have already bought it. And if you've not already bought it, when you buy it, you will have, assuming that the 2 patterns are already there, you will get both patterns. Then it's time for me to start working on, and I really should have started working on it already, the wood hat, which is the next in the series, in the sequence that I've set up for it. Excuse me. After that is the water hat, Pluvium, and then the metal hat. And the metal hat I've got the yarn for. I've got the yarn for wood and metal, and my goodness, I'm not sure. It's going to be one of the more bizarre hats that I've made. So I'm looking forward to designing it, but I'm also kind of not. So anyway, on workshop front, I am teaching at Stitches Expo at Home, I think is what they're calling it, in November. I did the Stitches at Home workshops this year, also this month, with an entirely new kind of workshop for me. Maybe not entirely new, it's just I haven't done it in about a decade. A project-based workshop that spans several different 2-hour sessions with the same group of people, and spaced over the span of a week, so that there is time to do homework. I was very happy with the way it came out. I might run it on my own in the future. It's not the kind of thing that is going to be run at your average big show, virtual big show. So, all right. So I got my workshops, my podcast question, and my pattern update. Now I guess it's time for me to talk a little bit about the topic at hand, which is 2-pattern and 3-color double knitting. And so these are my very first discoveries. We'll call them discoveries, because 2-pattern double knitting was actually something that was in use to some degree. There had been some prior art, although it was very simplistic. at the time that or around the time that I was discovering it. But let me tell you about how I discovered it. So I discovered two pattern double knitting first. So two pattern double knitting is a method of knitting a double knit fabric with two layers that are different patterns. And what I initially figured out was that I could do it for, well, honestly, it was a logo. It was an Apple logo. And unfortunately, the sample is long gone. Um, and but what I eventually settled on was lettering. Lettering is the more common use for something like this, because if you do a regular double knit pattern with a letter on it, it is going to end up as a mirror image letter on the other side. So a two pattern chart allows you to create a letter that is readable on both sides. For example, that's one thing that you can do with it. You can do really any two patterns. There are some limitations, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. I want to talk about the structure of the fabric. So basically what's going on here is that, well, no, let me wait, and let me tell you how I discovered it, as I said I was going to do. So I was teaching a class, and this is one of my very first classes. It might have been my first class, I'm not sure, on double knitting, and I was over my head. I had only just learned it probably the year or before, or within a year of my learning the technique, and I found that a lot of people at knitting groups that I went to had not heard of it or didn't know how to do it, and so I decided to teach the class. And it was at a local yarn shop called Circles, which is sadly gone long before COVID. And it was a class where I had way too many people, and I didn't have a really good idea of how I was going to teach it, but I tried. And as happens in my classes, I end up seeing all kinds of different mistakes, ways of making mistakes, and now, and 10, 15 years later, I can pretty definitively say that I've seen almost everything, any kind of mistake you can make in double knitting. So, but at this point, I didn't know what I was looking at. When somebody showed me a piece of fabric with a color change made on one layer, but not on the other. So all I could say at that point was you just have to go back, undo it back to that point. Whatever you did, you can undo it and go forward again, which is absolutely accurate. And as a matter of fact, is one of the possible options for fixing a mistake like that even now. The other one is duplicate stitch. So, so anyway, after the class, I started thinking about this mistake and tried to figure out how it might have happened. And I did a little bit of swatching, and I figured out that, yeah, it is possible to do a pair of stitches that does not consist of one of each color, and instead consists of both the same color, AA or BB, instead of AB or BA. What that opens up in terms of design possibilities is kind of amazing. And if you're not limited to having the same pattern on both sides, simply in reversed color and reversed orientation, you can do all kinds of things. And that's what I started figuring out. So that's what created two pattern double knitting. Originally I called it non-reversible double knitting. So so two pattern double knitting, as I said, the initial concept was using a logo, the Apple logo, as a matter of fact, because the Apple logo is actually a really good way to test this out, as most of the Apple logo is reversible. It just has a bite out of one side and a stem pointing in a particular direction. But the rest of the logo is all the same shape, which means most of it is just regular double knitting. It just has a couple little areas that are in need of two pattern double knitting to make it look recognizable as an Apple logo on both layers. Now, I made a little swatch of that, and then I made a hat with it. And I never published it because I was afraid of getting sued by Apple. And it wasn't the greatest hat in the world either. Still, it was the first thing that I did, and unfortunately I don't have a picture of it. But I do have at least I have the revised edition of Four Winds. Now, I have no idea, by the way, if you are seeing this with a mirror image W here or not. I'm seeing it like that on my screen because I have my video mirrored because it looks more comfortable for me. But if you're seeing this as a mirror image W, I assure you that it actually is a W in normal readable direction. So this is the revised edition. This hat, the Four Winds hat, has been through multiple revisions, and this one's in sport weight yarn, done for my book Extreme Double Knitting, the revised edition from last year or 2 years ago now. As you can see, it's got an E on the other side, a W on this one. The N is a readable N on the other side, etc., etc. So. So that was, what I was initially doing with this concept. And the question is, how is this happening? And when you do a pair of stitches with both stitches in the same color, the other color has to go somewhere. Where is it going? And that's really the core of this question, of how these two techniques, this and multicolor double knitting, are related. Where does that yarn go? Well, it goes inside the work, of course. It's not outside, you can't see it, so it's got to be inside since it's still there. There's a strand running between the two layers. Now, when you do a knit in A and a purl in A, if you didn't have another strand, we would call that 1x1 ribbing. And that is actually structurally what's going on. You're getting 1x1 ribbing, but because it's surrounded by other double knitting, usually that 1x1 ribbing section isn't very large. It's just doing a little bit of work to make things two pattern-ish, and then going back to regular double knitting again. So that 1x1 ribbing section isn't really all that large, but the yarn is still being hidden inside of it. So it's going behind the knits in front of the purls, behind the knit in front of the purl. And so, yeah, if you stretch it out, you're going to see a little bit of that strand. But that's only happening in the two pattern sections. Anywhere that you're getting standard A, B, or BA pairs, there's no strand. So, as I said, I use this a lot for lettering. Really, the best examples that I have are the Resistimus scarf. It's apt for the season of elections. Has a bunch of resistors, and of course it reads resist on both sides. That's a free pattern, by the way, on Ravelry. And a much later concept here is the Rats Live on No Evil Star scarf, which is very, very long and is a huge palindrome. So reads Rats Live on No Evil Star. From one end to the other is surrounded by rats and stars, and all of the letters are individually charted as two pattern double knitting, unless of course they are already symmetrical, in which case they don't need to be charted that way. So those are just some samples in two color, two pattern double knitting. Resistimus is of course done in 14 colors, but only 2 at a time. So onward to multicolor double knitting. Multicolor double knitting came very shortly after two pattern double knitting in my catalog of discoveries, and this was something that I had not seen done anywhere else before. So two pattern double knitting, I had seen really rudimentary stuff like, horizontal stripes on one layer of a hat and vertical stripes on the other. I just did those in the wrong direction, but you know what I mean. The person who designed that hat, when I talked to her, she didn't even think of it as double knitting. It was just a repeating pattern of knits and purls in different colors that she was doing, and came out with this pattern, which was absolutely two pattern double knitting. So, and then I saw it also in a book, possibly by Melissa Liebman. I cannot remember. I'm sorry to whoever it was, who did a little swatch of two pattern double knitting with like an X on one side and an O on the other, or something like that. Very, very small, easily repeatable pattern, but not very complex. So the concept was already there. Multicolor double knitting was not, to the best of my knowledge. I have not seen anyone using three colors in the way that I was using them in double knitting. Plenty of people had tried to add accents of things in their double knitting in various ways, but the way that I did it in this formulaic way with what I call a color rotation was, to the best of my knowledge, new. And so this is the structure hat. This is the revised edition of the very first thing that I did in three color double knitting. So you'll notice here that all three colors are used in any given row. I'll flip it inside out so that you can see that more clearly. Even if they're not being used used heavily in one layer, they're going to be used on the other layer. At some point, either on one layer or the other, they are going to be used in every row, or round in this case. So this one is, of course, a revised version in sport weight yarn versus the original in worsted weight yarn, and it's gone through a number of revisions, but the general concept is the same. Multicolor double knitting has three different colors, but only two layers. I used to call it triple knitting, but that doesn't really fit, because double knitting doesn't actually refer to the colors, it refers to the layers. So this is three color double knitting, a subset of multicolor double knitting. And the idea here is that every pair has a color order. The color order is normally either AB or BA. In this case, it's AB, BC, or CA. So we have, instead of a binary relationship, we have a color rotation. And so A is B on the other side, B is C on the other side, C is A on the other side. For example, there are actually 6 possible color rotations for this hat, and this is just one. So because you are only ever looking at it from one layer, you're only ever looking at 3 possible color orders. If you were doing this flat, for example, like the Parallax 3.0 here, you'd be seeing 3 more. AB, BC, CA, AC, CB, BA. And there are 3 more after that, but I'll talk about them in just a minute. So because you have 2 layers and 3 colors, every pair uses a knit and a purl color and has 3 yarns to deal with, which means that third yarn has to go somewhere. Where does it go? Well, we just asked that question and answered it. It goes inside. But that was 2 pattern double knitting, and this is 3 color double knitting. And there's the relationship. So 3 color double knitting is related to multicolor double knitting because of this rule. The rule is that anytime you are using fewer, to make stitches, anytime you are using fewer yarns than you are carrying, that unused yarn has to go somewhere. So in two pattern double knitting, when you're doing AA or BB colors, AA or BB pairs, you are only using one yarn, but you have two. In multicolor double knitting, you're using two yarns at any given time, but you have three. So if you have four color double knitting, you may be using, you may have two strands running inside. But the point is that there are always strands running inside. And you don't have to do anything to make those strands happen. You just keep moving the yarn as if you were doing regular double knitting, and the strand will automatically happen. Now there are some limitations for that. Of course, very long strands, just like in stranded knitting, will tend to distort your work. And because you don't have access to the strands, you have to do certain things to make the fabric not distort. This is something that really is best learned from my books, or take one of my workshops. I do teach my multicolor workshop. As a matter of fact, I'm teaching it at Stitches at Home in November. The two pattern workshop I have yet to figure out exactly how to do in a virtual setting, and so that at the moment is on hold until I figure that out, largely because it involves a printed worksheet, and in this day and age not everybody has a printer, and until I figure out a good way to do that in a virtual setting, it's going to be hard. So as I said, two pattern and three color double knitting are related concepts. They happened at the same time. I developed them, or added my refinements to them at the same time as I was designing these techniques. They were some of the earliest things that went into my repertoire of design, and of course, because they're related, the obvious thing was for me to combine them. So here are two more pieces. This is the Falling Blocks hat. Again, this is the revised edition. This hat was actually the second pattern I ever released as a pattern, as a standalone pattern on Ravelry, and the first I released for pay. The initial version of this had this pattern going all the way to the crown on both layers. This one, being a revised edition, I had more time to figure out how to get both patterns to decrease at the same time, and so I ended up, as you can see, with both of them. I seem to have lost my light. 1 second. A little bit more. Okay. So anyway, with this hat done in the round, actually it doesn't actually make any difference if it's in the round or flat, because of the unpredictability of adding a third color and a second pattern at the same time. You're actually going to end up with those three extra pairs, so or three extra color orders that you might encounter in three color two pattern double knitting, which are AB, BC, CA, AC, CB, BA, AA, BB, and CC. So 9 different possible pairs, or 9 different possible color orders in any given pair that you might encounter in these charts. The charts, by the way, are very unusual looking. I don't have one immediately on hand, which I apologize for, but again, this is something that you can check out in my books, Standalone Patterns, or take a workshop. And of course, if I'm talking about two pattern, three color double knitting, I have to show this. This is the 52 pickup scarf. As you can see, it's made out of cards, and every card has a front and a back. So that's the front, and there's the back. So all the backs you see have fronts on the other layer and vice versa. It's easily one of the most complicated things I've ever made, and fortunately, it, like all of these other pieces, were able to be rescued during the demolition of our home. So thank goodness for really strong moth protection, which also helped with really strong water and smoke protection. So anyway, I designed this one sort of in between books, and frankly, it was something that my wife came up with while she was a little drunk, and I took as a challenge and made into this crazy thing that has become really one of my most visible pieces. And this is only one of two different revisions of it. The K Club version, which is something that was done by Knit Companion a while ago. I'm honestly not sure if they've done it again anytime recently, but had a sort of 3-month knit-along where people were working on either individual cards or the whole thing. And I charted an entirely fresh version called the K Club edition, with smoother letters and a different back. So it was a lot of fun to redesign. Unfortunately, all of the samples for that one were lost, but I do have somebody who's going to be reknitting the entire scarf of that, which I am very happy about, and blessed to have such amazing followers. So that's what I wanted to say about 2-pattern and 3-color double knitting. This is about as in depth as a thing is going to get in this format. When I go to podcasts, I'm going to, and I say when, it could be if, it really will depend on what people want, and what I have the time and ability to do. But I would like to go in that direction, and if I do that, I'm going to very likely be doing it in a sort of modular method, where I'm going to be talking about a pattern and going into some depth about how it was designed, and roadblocks I ran into and how I overcame them, etc. I'll have a module where I'm talking about a yarn that I like, or a product that I like, where I'm talking about somebody else's work that I really like and want to see more of, and maybe in a different life I'd like to actually have time to knit somebody else's work. And there may even be a little module on a quick tutorial, because I want to get more of that stuff out there, and it's been slow going getting my videos out, as I'm sure you've seen if you've been following my YouTube channel, and it's mostly non-existent updates. Although I did put out, and this is another update which you might be interested in, a little while ago we had a show called Fiber World 2020, and it was put together by Kel from 100 Ravens and his team, and it's just a truly amazing vision of a show, but it was I had some technical difficulties. Basically, I had signed up to do a demo, which I did, and I think people enjoyed, of a bunch of different interesting double knit techniques that I don't often demo, and then a presentation on the history of double knitting, which is something that I often used to give to guilds. And I did this presentation, and it turned out that I wasn't sharing my screen for the entire time, and so they were just looking at me like this, talking at you, and no photos, no slides, no nothing. And I'm sure it was interesting, but I it wasn't what I meant to do. And so it took me some time, but I eventually reshot the presentation and stuck it up on YouTube. So if you're looking, if you're interested in that presentation and would like to see it, if you were at Fiberworld or you weren't, but you'd like to see a presentation on the history of double knitting, go check out my YouTube channel. And I'll put a link to that in the comments on this after I get off. That about does it for me, folks. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with me for this half hour or so. And if you weren't hanging out with me for this half hour or so, I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen after the fact. Again, I'm looking to probably do a podcast in the future. Let me know your thoughts on that. Either as comment to this or comment to my other post from this morning. And hopefully I will see you again, or at least you'll see me again in the future. And stay tuned, more workshops to come, more new designs, etc., etc. Visit my website, yada yada. Thank you very much. And this is Alistair Postquin signing off.